And to me, this argument just sounds like we're basically seeking to use this undue power for our own good, instead of addressing the root cause and stripping this tool of its power in the first place. Alright, so now that I've talked about how I personally feel about the ideal of representation in media and also acknowledged where I think the other side of this argument is coming from, I think the natural thing to do would be to try to offer a solution. It's one thing to complain about the current state of affairs, but I think it's more helpful for everybody to put forth solutions so that we can critique them and narrow them down to a single decisive step. That being said, I'm not going to pretend like I know what that final step is. This is just going to be my opinion on what I think needs to be done in order to solve this controversial issue. But I do invite any good faith critiques of my ideas so that in working through them, we may eventually find a solution that would satisfy everybody who is affected by this problem. But with all that said, let's just get into it. So first of all, I think we need to identify specifically what the problem is. And from what I've seen, read, and heard, it seems like the problem is that the minority communities in this country believe that for far too long, we have been represented in the media as archetypical, stereotypical caricatures of the types of people that actually exist within our community. And also that we haven't been given enough opportunities to be the leading figures in the more conventionally popular stories, often being relegated to background characters like the sidekick or the comedic relief. And as a result of this, the people within our communities who constantly see themselves represented in these ways start to believe that this is just our lot in life. Never to be the one saving the world, or the one running the Fortune 500 company, or the romantic interest in a love story.
Maybe they're right. It's not really the brown girls from Jersey City who save the world.
The claim is that seeing ourselves constantly relegated to the side characters who never achieve the glory that the main characters achieve creates a negative feedback loop which discourages the people within these communities from ever even striving to achieve those heights. And so the push for representation is a push for these communities to see themselves as the heroes, the bosses, the love interests, etc., so that we can begin to understand that we are just as capable of achieving these heights as the heroes that we've typically seen on the big screen. And again, just as I said in my last video, on the surface, this solution does make some sense. If black characters in media are only shown to be rappers, athletes, and criminals, and as a result, the young black population that watches these movies start to believe that their only options in life are to either be a rapper, an athlete, or a criminal, then maybe creating a TV show where all the black characters are lawyers, doctors, engineers, and CEOs would communicate to them that they have plenty of other options. That makes sense, and I don't deny the logic of this solution. So why then do I disagree with the ideal of representation if it is such a sensible solution to a very real problem? And to answer that question, I need to ask a different question. Do you believe that it is the media's responsibility to teach us what we can or can't be in life? Do you believe that media should have the power to determine the limits of the human beings that engage with their stories? Personally, I don't believe that the media should have that power at all. I don't think that power should rest with anybody but the individual. And so that is why, at its core, I disagree with the ideal of representation as a solution to these problems, because it continues to place that power in the hands of the media. Power that, again, I don't think it should have. I think that the purpose of media is just to tell stories. And yes, we can and should take inspiration from these stories. I have repeatedly talked about the impact that stories like The Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones have had on me. These stories are partially responsible for communicating the ideals and principles that I place value in today. And I've made videos explaining specifically what each of these stories has taught me. Whether it was Game of Thrones teaching me the importance of empathy by making us, the viewers, root for the very person that we had spent 2.5 seasons hating, just by showing us the circumstances under which that character acted. Or whether it was The Lord of the Rings teaching me about the intoxicating allure of power and the dangers it presents if we aren't constantly vigilant against its temptations. But these stories never dictated to me what I could or could not be. They simply revealed to me the principles, convictions, and ideals that I now strive for. I believe that no matter the story, this is what is at the heart of it. The idea, the message, or the lesson that is trying to be conveyed. I believe that this is why we tell stories. I believe that this is their purpose. And I believe that we should allow stories to serve this purpose without bestowing upon them any extraneous privileges or powers, such as dictating to us what we can or can't achieve materially in our lives. When a story tells us what we can or can't be, then in my opinion, that is an indication that we have given the story too much power. And by focusing on representation to fix the aforementioned issues concerning our minority communities, we essentially ignore this reality and actually put more power into the hands of the media to dictate to us our potential in this life. We're essentially saying that we acknowledge that media already plays too big of a role in influencing people's minds about the behaviors and personalities of certain demographics. But in order to combat that influence, we're going to give this tool even more power, only now it'll be used in our favor. And to me, this argument just sounds like we're basically seeking to use this undue power for our own good, instead of addressing the root cause and stripping this tool of its power in the first place. Remember what Gandalf said in The Fellowship of the Ring when Frodo tried to give him the ring?
Understand, Frodo, I would use this ring from a desire to do good, but through me, it would wield a power too great and terrible to imagine.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. I feel like we need to destroy this power and not try to use it for ourselves. Because when you don't address the root cause of an issue and you only attack the symptoms, you tend to do more harm than good, and you might actually end up exacerbating already existing issues while allowing the real problem to grow and fester. And I kind of touched on some of these exacerbated and also newly created problems in my previous videos, like how the definition of representation is so loosely defined and there doesn't seem to be a definitive end goal where we can say we've achieved it. There's just a sentiment that more is better, even though percentage-wise, Hollywood already pretty much matches up with the real-world demographics, at least for black and white people, and yet the calls for more representation ensue. I also mentioned how representation might not actually solve the problem, seeing as that was also the rallying cry for ending police brutality. And yet, even though the police demographics almost directly match up with the general American population demographics, again, at least for black people, police brutality is still rampant, specifically in black communities. And so I think we justifiably have to question whether representation is really an adequate solution to the problem. There's also the issue of creating stories and characters specifically for individual groups and demographics, and how that inherently excludes everybody who doesn't fall into your target audience and discourages them from engaging with your story, resulting in those stories flopping or getting canceled because they didn't have enough support. And lastly, there is the hypocrisy of the representation ideal, because if we get so up in arms about whitewashing, which, just to be clear, I think is justifiable, I think we should be upset with that, but that means that we can't turn the other cheek when we witness blackwashing. One of the more prominent examples of this occurred in the movie Doctor Strange, where the character of the Ancient One, who is depicted as an Asian man in the comics, was substituted for Tilda Swinton, a white woman. There was outrage at this casting choice, which in principle I can understand. However, in the same movie, the character of Baron Mordo, who is a white man in the comics, was given to Chiwetel Ejiofor, a Nigerian man, and it was radio silence from the fans because the person being swapped was a white man and the person taking his place was black. And so this creates a rules for thee but not for me environment, and we're seeing the effects of that environment manifest today. When Ariel from The Little Mermaid was race swapped, everybody was quick to defend this decision, declaring that since Ariel's race plays no important role in the story, she can be played by literally anybody from any ethnicity, regardless of the fact that she was originally portrayed as a white teenage girl. But when Scarlett Johansson was given the role of Motoko Kusanagi in the live-action remake of Ghost in the Shell, there was a large public outcry to have that character portrayed by an Asian actress, as the source material depicted her, even though Motoko's race is of no importance to the story. And it's sad because as a huge fan of Ghost in the Shell, it is literally one of my top 10 favorite movies and TV shows of all time. Okay, I literally watched that TV show with subtitles. All right, if you know, you know. Literally one of the hardest TV shows I've ever had to read in my entire life. But anyway, because I was such a huge fan, I actually agreed with the outcry, but for very different reasons, obviously. The reality is that Motoko's Asianness is completely irrelevant to the story, seeing as her character's central conflict deals with the fact that she is, in a sense, disconnected from humanity since her entire body is cybernetic and she sees herself only as a consciousness. And so her ethnicity is so far removed from the story. And so if people defend Ariel's race swapping but condemn Motoko, then the fact is that they're just using that power for themselves, and what they're really saying is that white people can't race swap, but minorities can't. And that, in essence, is the definition of hypocrisy. But again, these are just a few examples of how representation exacerbates and creates problems. And what all of this leads to is takes like this.
This message is to all our would-be accomplices and white allies. This message is to all the white people who have BLM in their bio. If you really want to prove to black people that you love us and you care about us and you are down for the cause, do not go see that movie opening weekend. You buy your ticket, you give it to a black person or a black family who can't afford to go. And then you go sit at that theater in front of the doors. You make sure that every black person in that theater can enjoy that movie in peace. You make sure that you use your body to block us from anybody who would be coming in that theater to do us harm. That is your job. You can go see it on another weekend. Go see it on the second or third weekend. But the first weekend, that's for us. To do anything other than this is anti-black.
Essentially, we've come to the point where we've decided that segregation is actually desirable as long as it favors us, and that white people should be willing to sacrifice their time and money in order to serve our interest, with them getting nothing in return. And unless you genuinely believe that the sins of the father should be revisited upon the son, then you can't support this ideal, because it's not the white people of today who enslaved our ancestors and committed mass genocide. These are just regular people trying to survive just like us, and they have no obligation to answer for the crimes of people they never knew and likely don't even agree with ideologically. In any case, this is where I believe the ideal of representation, if left unchecked, will lead us to a resegregated world where the power of our past oppressors is now in our hands. Instead of dismantling this power, we've just taken it and weaponized it in our favor. And anybody who calls out this hypocrisy is labeled as anti-black or racist, misogynist, sexist, etc. And this is why I think representation fails as a solution and only serves to create more problems than it solves. Basically, I believe that fighting for more representation is akin to putting a band-aid on an open wound while we die from internal bleeding. It just continues to feed the beast that is media and exacerbates the already existing problem of media's undue influence on our lives. And more importantly, it simply doesn't address the root cause of the problem, which is, in my opinion, the myriad of socioeconomic policies that continue to keep minority groups isolated and trapped in poverty, resulting in these communities being forced to resort to certain behaviors just to survive or make it out. In my opinion, that is the internal bleeding that needs to be addressed here. It doesn't matter if a young black boy living in the inner city sees a TV show about doctors where the lead is a black man and decides to become a doctor himself if he doesn't have access to the tools that would allow him to achieve that dream in the first place. It doesn't matter that he's decided to be a doctor if his school doesn't have the adequate resources to bolster his education, if his community is riddled with crime, if he doesn't have access to healthy food because minority communities don't typically have access to affordable organic grocery stores, if his family can't even afford higher education, etc. These are the things that need to be addressed, and I believe that once they are, then our communities won't need to look to media to tell us what we can or can't achieve, because those paths would have already been opened up for us and we would already have members within our communities who have reached those heights. We would know that black people can be doctors, lawyers, engineers, and CEOs because our family members and our neighbors already hold those titles, not because we saw it on a TV show. And so this is, in my opinion, where our focus should lie. The socioeconomic restructuring of society that will open up the paths towards success for everybody within the society. And so this is why I know that my solution is unpopular, because this is a slow process that has been in the works since the abolishment of slavery. And even though great strides have been taken, there is still a seemingly insurmountable amount of distance to travel. Nevertheless, I do believe that this is the proper solution, because it puts media in its place in terms of the inordinate amount of power we give it, while also addressing the myriad of other issues within our society, without resorting to hypocrisy or untenable solutions that only serve to exacerbate current issues. I do concede, however, that in the meantime, there absolutely should be more stories told about minority populations across the globe. I mentioned this in my first video about representation, but diversifying the types of stories being told will only benefit everybody involved in the storytelling industry, giving previously disregarded groups the opportunity to be the leaders of these tales while telling stories that convey different ideals, principles, and messages from what we've seen before, allowing us to find new inspiration in a multitude of characters from all across the globe. And by doing this, by focusing on the integrity and the diversity of the story and not of the characters, we will inherently create an environment where stories featuring a vast array of characters from various ethnic backgrounds can appeal to all demographics. You could have a world where young American white children look up to Chinese, Indian, or Native American heroes from folklore. You know, like they already did, which resulted from focusing on the integrity and diversity of the story and not necessarily of the character. And we could facilitate this by not inherently excluding them from the process by declaring that these stories and these characters aren't for them, like we used to do. In fact, this environment would almost explicitly be created in order to say yes to all of you who aren't of the demographic featured in this movie. this is still for you, because these characters are heroes and idols irrespective of the fact that they don't look like you, and you should view them as such and try to imbue their strengths into your own being while avoiding their weaknesses. That is the environment that I feel we should be striving for. And so through this solution, I think we find a happy medium. We create an environment where all minorities have more opportunities to star and lead these stories while also focusing on the real cause of the issue in the first place. And we do it all without resorting to hypocritical ideals that only serve to exacerbate the divide between the various tribes of humanity. But in any case, I think that's going to be it for this one. If you made it this far, thank you so much for indulging me. Again, I know that this is going to be an unpopular solution since this is something that is much more difficult to achieve and will take a lot of time. But I really do believe that this is the only way to adequately address this issue without continuing to give media the exorbitant amount of power that we afford it within our society. Again, just like in The Lord of the Rings, I think the goal should be to dismantle this power, not to flip it and use it for our own benefit. Just a quick side note, I do try to post every Sunday at noon, but I am going to be away this upcoming week, so there isn't going to be a new video next Sunday. Just wanted to give a quick heads up. But anyway, with that said, again, thank you for watching. I hope this made sense, and as always, if it didn't, please feel free to let me know so that I can try to address any misconceptions in the comments. But with that said, I wish you all the very best going forward. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.